Yo, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Ethan.
Oh, this is much better. This is much
Hey,
better.
I
Okay.
am here. And
All
I
right.
got
Sound great.
awesome.
Let's start this over again. Last we talked, let's see. You said that you had an experience that you have no explanation for.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was a shared experience
Share
with
it.
my wife and a friend of mine. We were playing video games.
Okay.
And it got later in the night, and we began telling stories, which led to the supernatural. I had the idea to, basically have like a seance in a way. And how I conducted it was I took a candle and I went and set it on a windowsill. I had that candle lit, and as a group, we sat there and we were asking for anything supernatural. You know, I was asking for aliens. I was repeatedly asking to have a supernatural experience. I wanted to see, is it ghost? I just kept on keeping that in the forefront of my mind, watching this candle burn.
Okay. Okay. So, what gave you the idea to use a
Time went
candle?
by.
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Oh, because because of learning things about meditation. Meditation, you can get focal points, something to focus on, and you just do not let anytime you catch your eyes drifting away from it, you bring it back to the focus point. It's
So the candle was more for you to focus on rather than for the presence of this whatever to manifest itself. This was for you?
Correct.
Okay, keep going.
Correct. Okay. And as we're sitting there, the darkness, all the lights were turned out in the place. And darkness enveloped the candle. The candle went out. The candle came back on. We all gasped. We're like, what the heck? And then my wife and my buddy started freaking out, saying they saw something in the hallway. They saw a shadowy figure.
May I ask a question real quick?
Okay, there's a lot to go over here, so we just want to make sure we're following along. Ethan has a question for you.
Were you all in the same room, or were they in another room doing the same thing? Were they aware of what you were doing?
We were all sitting in the same room and facing the candle.
Okay, Ethan. Okay. What's your take on this before I puck it down?
So, if I'm understanding it correctly, the three of you were in the room. You all focused on the candle, and then darkness encompassed said candle, and it momentarily went out and then lit back up.
Yes.
And then your roommate saw something in another room.
Yes, there is the hallway that is also attached to the room that we were sitting in. And they saw, I did not personally see the shadowy figure, but my wife and this friend of mine saw it. And then the next morning,
wait. Before we get to the next morning, we got to figure out one experience at a time here. Okay. One experience at a time. So here's the problems that I'm having really quick with the experimentation and the methodology of this. When you have a source like a candle and you put it in a place like a window, it's going to be prone to a lot of draft and a lot of movement around the place. Any sort of even mundane movement, like if you wave your hand nearby, it's going to cause a disruption in the flame, right? So this is why I don't really like the idea of using a flame to test whether or not something, if there is a presence there, especially not on the window.
I'm not sure if you're truly appreciating how this candle went out.
And I mean,
in a room.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, could you perhaps expand on it? Because the way you described it, it sounds like it could have just been wind putting it out.
Wow.
Like, I mean, you have to appreciate where we're coming from here, yo, because we weren't there with you. We weren't in the mood and the moment. And of course that has a lot to do with it. But where we're coming from, if you have one candle, especially in a part of the house where there's not normally a light source, if that's the only light source you have going on, which it sounds like it was because it was darkness, it's going to make weird shadows around the house. It's going to put shadows in places where you've never seen shadows before. And then when you say that two other people saw something you described as a shadowy figure, this really doesn't sound all that surprising. And even if candles, if wax candles appear to go out, usually there's still a little bit of embers in there that can eventually start to light it back up, especially if it's somewhere with a good oxygen source like a window. So you maybe there's some element of this that was possibly surprising to you or caught you off guard about it, but from what I'm hearing nothing that can't be explained by something that's completely mundane. But I will suggest something else for you, that instead of using one candle, you use many candles. Okay, you make a birthday cake full of candles. That way you can actually clearly tell, is it a draft that's affecting all the candles? Is something supernaturally smart enough to affect just one candle at a time? Can they make a little pattern with how they?
You have to understand them. You have to let me jump in real quick.
Okay.
You have to understand that I am a non-believer. I am a skeptic. I did investigate. I do have an idea of things that could cause drafts and that could blow out a candle. And then I do have the understanding that it can relight. But it was the darkness that closed in on the burning flame and it went out.
I don't quite know what that means.
Yeah.
Darkness enveloping I mean, if it's the only light source and it starts to go dim, obviously it's going to look darker and darker as it gets dim. So I guess I need help understanding what you mean by a darkness.
The room got darker and darker until it put out the light. But and the thing is, we investigated. I looked around the window. It was a very fresh building that I was staying in. But the thing that is even more kind of crazy about it is the next morning. It's not. Next morning, my son awoke. Huh?
Sorry, go ahead.
Let's try to speed up a little bit, though. We got a couple of other callers that I want to get to. Let's hear what happened the next morning, and then I have a couple of questions. So,
okay. My son awoke and told us of the dream. His dream had a shadowy figure in it, and it chased him throughout his dream.
So, quick regarding that, two questions. Were any of you using or engaging in any type of like pharmaceutical drugs or medical marijuana of any capacity?
I don't even drink. I don't like to. I like to be aware.
Okay, so I guess
I don't like anything that will mess up my perceived reality. I have messed with that whenever I was younger in my teenage years. But
so
no.
Here's my question. When you say you investigated it, how did you investigate it? Like, did you try testing it again? Did you put the candle up again the next night and try and repeat the methodology? Because that's what I would think you would need to do to start testing that. And then possible explanation, your son.
I am.
sorry, 1 second. Your son, he could have heard, you guys talking about it. If this freaks you out and you saw the shadow, he could have been half asleep or he could have been awake, and he could have heard you talking about this shadow and then thought he had a dream about it.
Yeah, and this is the problem with investigations of this type, is that we want to do everything that we can to isolate all the variables possible before we say, okay, something's happening here that is beyond our scope and understanding, and now the best explanation is that something's going on that we truly don't understand. And I want to keep going with this with you, Yo, and I want to know what you want to do in the future to keep making more investigations and more experiments that start narrowing this down a little bit. So what is the next step that you're going to take to investigate this? I validate your experience. If you believe that's what happened to you, that's what happened to you. But I want to know more about this and what you're going to do to try to pin this down and figure out more about what's actually going on. What's next in the investigation for you? I got to have you answer this really quick because we got to get to a lot of other callers. But what's your next step on this? And then I hope we hear from you again.
I guess just to try to make contact with the other side. Or if there is another side, I mean, that's kind of a vague statement. But
why not try to replicate this again?
Supernatural. How do you? Yeah.
And that is the problem with the supernatural, because like everything that you're describing now, Ethan and I can come up with some very mundane explanations for, and those seem to be satisfactory, at least to the people you're describing this to. So I'm reminded of that show Stranger Things, where a woman was convinced that her son was on the upside down and was able to send her messages to electricity. So what did she do? She made it easy for him. She got a bunch of lights and she put down letters on the wall to match up with those lights, so that if her son wanted to send a message, he could do that through those lights. Now, of course, that's fiction, but that was really good methodology, saying this is a phenomenon that we experience. Let's make it as easy as possible for this phenomenon to happen again, and then let's see if we can come up with actual good explanations for it after we have completely ruled out as many of the mundane possibilities as we can. I'd love to keep talking to you about this, Yo, but we have a bunch of other callers here. I know that you're a repeat caller on the show, and I would love to hear more about what happens as you investigate this further. So thank you very much for hanging out with us.
Yeah. Hey, man, thanks for taking my call, and y'all will be hearing from me as well on y'all show. I do watch y'all show, The Perspective and the others. But yeah, thank y'all for having me.
All right. Have a good night, Yo. Thank you.
And for those that don't know, Puck will be on a week from this coming Tuesday. Yes.
I didn't even know that. So, okay. Well, I guess I need to clear my calendar a little bit on Tuesdays.